far too large to rightfully be called a sword. It was larger, thicker, heavier, and cruder than any normal blade. By all accounts, it was no more than a hulking mass of iron.
Hello! It is I, the untamable, the unmasterable, the irresponsible Doc, the fighter that will inevitably slay the host of this podcast. And over there, just sitting and having a cuppa, is the good old lich Brill. He wanted me to come over here and do the intro for you guys because he's still finishing. Oh, I think he's actually done. Come on over here.
Yeah.
All right, sit down.
No, but thank you. I do find it funny because just peek behind the curtain, we have had at least I've had the worst omens about today's episode, whether it's how we're recording messing up or the fact that I found a wasp flying around my studio right as soon as I came in to record, which was hilarious just because you go in to record, you hear something buzzing around and you're like, oh, it's got to be a fly. Let's open up, a window and let it out. No, it was a wasp. It was a huge wasp. And I was thinking, I'm like, that might make really good podcasting if I just let that live and battle it as I talk about goblins today.
Yeah. Well, and, I think the weave between our sending stones has been a little bit unstable, too. So that's been interesting.
It's brutal.
Oh, man.
It's brutal.
It's been an adventure, let me tell you.
Oh, that's the point, I think. I don't know. So today we're going down to Goblin Town. Ho, ho, my lad. If you don't know where that's from, you're way too young. So
Rip.
I, for one, am an expert with goblins. I can say that now. I can say that. Since our last recording, I have been deep into my lich's library, in the tomes, flipping through the many pages, just absorbing all I can about the goblin. And I gotta say, they're all right. I mean, and I think they're going to be that minion or that thing that a new DM or just a new campaign will use. Goblins are that 1/4. A goblin is a full first level boss. They're a nothing thing that you can throw at your party, and they can have as much or as little depth as you want. And I do want to clarify today that we are only talking about goblins. Your classic little green, or for some reason in 5e, tan goblins. Right. Those short little mean bastards with the pointy ears. We're not going into bugbears, the big hairy goblinoids,
right? And
we're not going into hobgoblins. Nobody cares about you hobgoblins. We're talking about your good old-fashioned goblin. It's kind of funny that goblins have that, I guess, fantasy tree or archetype, They have goblinoids in 5e and in D&D. And you look at it, goblinoids, in the same way you might look at the dragon kind or the fey kind. But again, we're only looking about those mean little rat bastards, which is fun for me, at least, just because I, for one, have not used goblins as much as I quite like. I always go for bullywugs, which are the frog people, or for kobolds, the broke, terrible dragon people, Right. That's kind of where I lean when I start creating a early level encounter.
Okay.
Kobolds seem like they have a lot going on, ? They seem like you can have inventors or sorcerers. They're after gold. They're kind of dragon-like, so you can kind of scratch that itch. And bullywugs are just stupid looking, so I enjoy them. But as far as it goes, goblins are definitely a big choice. Have you used goblins in early campaigns?
I have. I actually do like using goblins. I like using kobolds and goblins for those early encounters. They're both interesting to use, both for different reasons. Of course, if you're doing Lost Mines of Phandelver, you're going to be using goblins at the beginning, unless if you change something. They're all right. Kind of like what you said. They're solid. They're not anything crazy, but they're solid.
They're reliable for kind of an okay counter.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think about them too much, you're able to, it's kind of plug and play a little bit with them.
And they're a good monster to have when you need to kind of, I don't know, offhand throw something at a party, no matter what level they are. Like, you have enough goblins and you can challenge any party. It seems like if you have enough kobolds, then you just you kind of have a bunch of kobolds, right?
How many goblins does it take to kill an ancient black dragon?
The world may never know.
I mean, it's yeah, but while kobolds seem to be very into maybe traps or trying to get the upper hand, despite the fact that they are almost famous for dying, kobolds have kind of found this very special place in Dungeons and Dragons. Goblins, on the other hand, I don't think that scheming or cunning has gone through as much, because there are scheming and cunning goblins. You know, they're crude and gross and muck people, essentially.
Yeah.
But they don't really have that, I guess, trap feel to them when you're making an encounter. With kobolds, you can kind of have this idea of, okay, they're going to go into a kobold's lair and they're going to try to do the kobold thing, which is make maybe a meh trap.
Right.
A goblin, I feel like you could just charge into Goblin Town and slice off as many heads as possible, and eventually you'll hit the Goblin King or the Goblin Boss.
Yeah, that is very much so true with the goblins. I mean, it seems like they always have that, I don't know, structure that like you're always going to have your Goblin Boss or Goblin King or Goblin Commander or whatever it is that they're calling themselves. You're going to have
There's always the bigger goblin.
Yep, it's true. Yeah.
And I also think that they aren't really as loved they're loved by the community, but in a different way. They're more of a monster's monster than a kobold, because a kobold, you have people who play kobolds. And while there are people who can play goblins, you don't really see them as much.
No.
You do see them. I don't want to completely negate the fact that there are goblin players out there. However, I have seen way more kobolds. I've seen way more kobold artificers and warlocks trying to give glory back to the kobold, not even empire, give to their community.
Yeah.
Now, kind of jumping into goblins, I think something that people should remember when they're playing with them is the lore for goblins is as flexible as you need it to be. They aren't that complicated. The lore isn't that deep. It can get deeper and it gets more quirky and odd the longer you look through it. But if you're just saying, I need an encounter that has somebody fight a little mean, nasty green thing, that works. I also find kobolds to be fun as trader NPCs or some kind of merchant NPCs. I find those to be fun because they're so greedy, and to have, having a party negotiate with a little greedy goblin is, at least for me, a lot of fun. So when you build a goblin encounter, are you trying to make it like waves? Are they your waves of enemy? Are they kind of, do you use them more as NPCs? Do you lean more towards them as monsters?
I think my preference is there's a certain amount of cunning that comes with them, right? Because
a little bit.
Bandits are kind of brutish and stupid, right? And you're going to kill all the bandits, of course. Goblins try to come with this like, hey, I'm going to throw 3 goblins at you, and if those 3 guys die, I might try to negotiate with you a certain deal. So like, I usually like to have a structure of like several goblins to make a challenge, and then after the first few guys die, there might be one that goes, hold up, wait a second. Maybe I can throw 50 gold your way and we'll just, part as friends. Like,
they're selfish, they're greedy, they don't have a lot of, they're mainly flaws. I mean, not a lot of redeeming qualities to it. And when I said they're not cunning, I don't associate goblins necessarily with traps like I do kobolds.
Right.
But I guess in the way they go about social interaction, you could definitely say they have a scheming type quality to them.
I think scheming is a better way to put it. I think like their plans are usually pretty rubbish. And generally speaking, a goblin isn't going to be the smartest plan maker. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to a goblin getting what he wants, he's willing to kind of cut and paste whatever he can to get what he wants at the end of the day, even if that's just to get out alive.
You can really tell a lot from how that, as a DM, when you're playing a goblin NPC, think about where goblins come from. They're caves and mucks and swamps.
Yeah.
They're from gross places, and their, I guess, hierarchy is always based on the strong survive. It's that kind of tribalism.
Yep.
So the goblin boss might be a little bit stronger than someone else, and they might just be able to just bully their way into the top spot.
Yeah.
They're never, it's not like kings and nobility and all this pomp and circumstance behind it. It's who can punch the hardest. Now, or there is such a thing called a goblin with some magic. Magic is also loved and worshipped and used in goblin kind that you can kind of play with as a DM, but mostly they're going to be bandits with little swords and stab you a lot. Now, I have a question for you, Doc.
Oh boy, another one. Here we go.
Do you know what the word for magic is in goblin?
No freaking clue.
Booyog.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, are you serious?
I'm being very serious. I believe it's Booyahg, Booyog, or Booyog.
Are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just goblins?
No, better. Cyborg from Teen Titans, confirmed goblinoid.
Oh my god!
And they look at magic the same way, and it's kind of playing on that. They're cunning, but they're not that smart. So think about when you play a goblin who might have a mage. That mage is going to take over a tribe pretty easily, and it's the strong survive. So anyone who can make magic lights out of their hands, definitely the strongest for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
They don't see different forms of magic. A warlock, a cleric, a wizard, a druid, and any sorcerer, any kind of spellcaster is all going to look the same, even an artificer to a point, and they're going to call that Booyog. And if you're a very powerful goblin wizard or sorcerer, you are a Booyog, Booyog, Booyog.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
I love some of the lore behind these guys. I love how silly and weird it gets once you start really digging through, because you can tell it's just been generations of folks at Wizard of the Coast just having a good time. And that's kind of the other appeal of a goblin, is they are kind of silly.
Right.
They're not that intimidating. A bunch of goblins in the night attacking you, unless you're like level 1 and you're on the wrong neighborhood.
I think that actually is a really good point in that, like, they're approachable as enemies in the sense that, like, well, I don't know, like when you're playing a video game for the first time, and like if you play Dark Souls and you go into an area and you see an enemy, you kind of have to first be like, oh, well, like, how do I engage this thing? And there's this whole like apprehension that happens. But from like a just general knowledge standpoint, when you encounter a goblin in D&D, there's just this kind of thing that goes off in your head like, oh, I could probably kill that.
I could probably kill it. Yeah. I mean, it's not intimidating. It's of a small stature. It's not doing any grand cosmic power. It's not like when you meet someone like me, a lich.
Right.
You know, there's a different energy to it.
Right.
And you can already kind of tell just by looking at a goblin what's their deal, you know?
Right.
And what's actually going on through that little brain of theirs. I also think, though, that they make great rogue NPCs.
Yeah.
You know, goblins that steal things, go into the night, maybe take some gold or a baby or something.
Yeah.
With that, I kind of want to know, when it comes to actually using them as a low-level enemy, when you roll up on a Goomba or a goblin or what have you, in your mind's eye, do you always kind of see them as kind of XP? Because I feel like a lot of players, when they see a goblin, they go, oh, there's 25 right there, buddy. Yoink.
Yep. Yeah, it's yeah, that's the thing with goblins, is that they have an AC of 15 and they don't have that much health. I think on average they have 6, or is it 8? I think. Let me double check this real quick.
I want to say it's like 7.
It's 7. I missed it.
I am an expert.
Yes.
What's their attack if you're on there?
So their attack is going to be +4 to hit, and they do 1d6 +2 slashing damage. So an average of probably 5 or 6 damage per turn.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's and that for a level 1 party, that's going to be 2 hits from a goblin on a single person.
For a wizard versus 3 goblins is done.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that 15 AC. The thing is that like if you sneak up on a goblin, right, and you have advantage on that attack, you take the shot, you do the damage, and you move on because that goblin's likely going to be dead at the end of that. And that's the thing is like. You often see goblins in kind of these pairs or triplets even. And if you're playing with a standard party size of 4, you're going to be able to take them out in one go if you have the drop on them.
They're not going to like plot twist have a trebuchet or something.
I mean, you never know.
Although one of my favorite tropes that I learned from my Kobold DM was to give the little guy a big gun, essentially. A cleric kobold, his big thing that he would do is anytime he would use a kobold, he is like kobold rights through and through. He loves them as a creature character.
Yeah.
And they're fun. And his big thing would be like, what happens when a kobold finds a high power magic item? What happens then? That inspired me in one HK little jaunt. There was about a month where I just put out a thing to the HK server saying, I want goblin scalps.
Yeah.
If you kill goblins and you go back to this NPC, you're getting coin.
Yeah.
We've got a goblin scourge and I wanna kill him. And it ended up being a fun thing.
Yeah.
But one of that inspired one session where I had this idea of what happens if I take goblin stats, but I dress him up in essentially magic armor, and let's say he booyahag or whatever, he got a warlock pact.
Yeah.
And what happens if I make a goblin who isn't just 25 XP?
Right.
And he kind of got this very freedom fighter-esque thing.
Yeah.
Because they are sapient creatures. So I feel like there's every once in a generation type deal where you'll get that goblin who might be a little bit brighter than the rest and say, nah, fuck this, man. Let's really, rah, shish kumbah. Let's bring everything together and try to kill something.
Yeah.
So you have, I gave him a cool sword and I gave him armor. And I got to tell you, man, when the party rolled up on him, they laughed. They laughed at him. And then he decided to have waves of him and his goblins fuck their day up, which was a lot of fun.
I think that's actually something really interesting to point out is that stats wise, when you're looking mechanically at a goblin, they have the nimble escape feature, which lets them disengage or hide as a bonus action. And then they have stealth +6, looking at the standard goblin. And when you have a goblin that's a little bit brighter than the rest, as you said, who decides, hey, let's unionize and take down the man, that's a big problem because then they're planning this Black Ops, sneaking around thing, and then your party's camping, and then all of a sudden you have 10 goblins surrounding you in your camp. You can't see where they are, and they're just shooting you all with short bows, and consistent damage there. And I don't know. I've done that against players before, and that's actually been a lot of fun because it's like, oh yeah, we screwed over a few goblins that were over there, and then later on in the session it's like, no, in Soviet Perun, goblins screw you.
Well, and also something that I think really strikes at the heart of what a goblin is they're nasty little buggers, right? Mm-hmm. But I love the idea of a goblin clan swearing vengeance on a party and remembering their names and where they're going. Because first of all, unless you're talking about like a manticore or chimera or some kind of real, just a beastie, a hydra, a wyvern, these things that are just there to we were in the forest and we got attacked by, essentially a giant monster that is dumb. I love the idea of goblins swearing vengeance because they're smart enough to swear vengeance, and they're also petty enough to where vengeance is probably an option.
Yeah.
And, you can't just kill like 20 something of a people and walk away and expect that people to go, yeah, we forgive you.
Right.
Way to go. That's not gonna happen.
No. Hey, you backing up your lich mobile over there.
I am. I have this giant torture device, and I was just backing it over our editor.
For the goblins, right?
Again.
That's not for me, right? We're bringing.
Yeah, no, not yet.
Okay.
I also have to say that when it comes to building up a goblin encounter, you kind of want a lot of them, don't you? You never just want like 3. You're just like, nah, let's have them go down to Goblin Town. Let's get them in the mud. Let's get them in the pits. And I think that's also what players kind of expect. I mean, really, is it a D&D campaign if you didn't kill at least one goblin?
Right. Right.
You want to fight a dragon, you want to go through a forest with fairies, you want to do kind of the classic fantasy thing, and goblins are definitely just in that lexicon. And the grand scheme of just D&D monsters, beholders you want to fight, you want to talk to a dragon, you really want to see a mind flayer's lair maybe.
Yeah.
These are cool things that you can do in this world. And goblins are just kind of expected. Like, yeah, man, we're probably going to hit some goblins.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever been really a surprise when a goblin shows up.
Right.
Like when you're fighting through goblin or fighting through maybe a forest and then these goblins jump you.
Right.
You're like, yep. That's what they do, man. Yep. They're kind of expected. You know,
when you're going into the typical forest that's outside and, you just start on your adventure, when you find tracks, I think it comes up for pretty much everybody's minds like, oh, like, I wonder if these are goblins. And when it's like, oh, it's kobolds, okay. But like when it's a goblin, it's like, yep, called it. Like, give me my $5 because it's just kind of expected, as you said.
You'll hear them go, what is it? Crack or something like that, which I want to say is attack or battle, and there's such a fun little thing that people have added lore to it over time to where, there are goblin words, that a DM can play with. I don't know. Do you know any abyssal words? You don't.
No.
No. And to the point where, as a player, my Tabaxi barbarian, Storm Barbarian, Stomps.
Oh yeah, I love Stomps.
I
miss Stomps.
I played him a lot. He was he became an epic level character. I had him retire. Been through a lot of campaigns with that character.
Yeah.
But his main backstory was that the reason why he was able to summon the storm and, kind of get the rage of a hurricane and all that jazz was he was a sailor who got stranded. And he got stranded on an island and was basically attacked and overwhelmed by goblins. And he learned how to speak goblin to survive in that little awful society. Yeah. And then he got rageful and was able to kill them all. And actually that backstory has inspired most of my characters can speak goblin in the same way that you are most likely going to run across a goblin. Probably one of those languages that you don't think you should speak, but you probably should when you're choosing. A lot of people might go, I'll learn Abyssal and Infernal and all that stuff for when you come across a cult and you find those ancient writings and be like, I can speak it. You should go for the Elven languages, the Dwarf language, and Goblin, man. I know you want to speak Draconic, but you're going to meet goblins.
No, I 100% agree.
It's kind of like Spanish.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's learning.
Not saying that, oh, God. Not saying the Spanish, oh, God.
Listen, God, what did you do?
I'm just saying that as a lingua franca, there's common and then there's languages that many people speak. Oh God.
Well, it's like if you live in Europe and you learn English, right? It's
right.
It's like, yeah, like you absolutely speak German, or you speak Spanish, or you like French.
Fuck you. I'm a lich and evil. I don't care. You can't hurt me or my phylactery. Fuck you.
There we go.
I'm so upset.
It's fine. It's fine. Our ratings will just take the hit.
Wonderful. I do think, however, that it is something that players should think about is if you assume that you're going to run into a goblin, have a goblin. Like, I would love for one of my players and one of my campaigns to look at each other like, hey, guys, have we ever discussed what happens when we get ambushed by goblins? Do we have a goblin plan? Because I guarantee you, we're going to hit goblins.
Yeah.
Like, eventually. We should have a dragon plan. We should have, maybe an undead plan. But have we thought about the goblins?
Right.
Anyone think goblins? And you never do until you see them. And you're like, yeah, of course. And then you kill a bunch.
Right.
And I also like the idea of, let's say you're a player and you speak goblin and you hear over the hair, booyah, booyah, booyah. And you're like, oh shit, a mage is coming at us or some kind of magical, type. And that's fun just because not a lot of language words, like not language words. Oh my God. Not a lot of words in different languages are spread out through D&D. You can never really learn a full language, but just to have those little terms that a DM could use that if you're a player and then that could be, a fun interaction for both you and who you're playing with.
Absolutely.
I do want to mention also, considering the fact that one of my favorite parts of the whole concept of goblins is honestly their religious kind of tendency and the lore behind the god that they worship.
Yeah.
Do you know who that is?
I just hear our editing goblin putting in the Jeopardy theme right about now.
That's copyrighted.
He's so mad.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting. We got to be careful what he says. He might mess up our future episodes that we talk about here.
That's true.
Hey,
that is very true.
Just give him an extra cookie. He'll be okay.
When you give a goblin a cookie.
Yeah. I do not know what god they worship there.
So they're rather monotheistic, but for a very cruel reason. So they worship, I believe it's pronounced Maglubyet. Maglubyet?
I'm sorry?
Maglubyet. Maglubiyet. Also known as the Mighty One or the High Chieftain. He's the chief deity of the goblins, the hobgoblins, and the other kinds of goblins. So he's got connections to the god Bane. He has connections to a lot of other kind of demonic types, and he's been there in D&D for a long time. I believe ever since first edition.
Fascinating.
This lore has been here for a while, but he's also considered to be this god of war and cruelty. He's the battle lord. And it's kind of funny because when you compare them to hobgoblins see him as a form of, we should conquer everything for our battle lord.
Right. But
your regular goblins fear him because they believe when you die, you become a part of his undying legions, which is worse than living. So they don't fear death. They fear essentially their heaven, which is basically being bullied in the afterlife. Their whole existence is so revolved around being pushed down by the bigger guy that even their death is going to be that as well. And it's even reflected in the story of how this god came to power. Apparently, there was a longer or a bigger kind of D&D deity pantheon, and this mighty one slew the other gods and took control. That is kind of very showing of what goblins are like. They will kill and try to become the superior, and through, just being brutish and terrible. I believe there's one other goblin god who is allowed to live, or there might be a two, but I can't really remember their names. I'd have to look them up quickly. But long story short is this goblin god, this mighty one, who is described, at least in the monster manual, as like this 11-foot scarred, goblin battle lord thing, kind of reflects upon the entire premise behind goblinhood, I guess you might say.
Right.
And I like the fact that when I would love to have in a campaign a goblin explain that to someone, like a cleric, be like, I worship the shining god, and they're like, we worship the mighty one. He killed the other ones. Everything sucks. I'm never gonna be happy.
Man, that sounds like a wonderful. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And I'm pretty sure there's one other goblin god who starts with a K who was allowed to live just to help keep goblins in line for the main god. But essentially it's a monotheism to him in a way. And it's kind of funny because we don't ever imagine, one god conquering a pantheon and then ruling shit with an iron fist, which is exactly what goblins are like in their societies, but also after death, which is hilarious.
Absolutely.
Because if you're ever dealing with a goblin in a campaign or a fight and you're threatened to kill them, at least for now on, the goblins, I don't want to die for a lot of reasons. Dying sucks. But on top of that, they believe where they're going is going to suck worse.
Right. So they will do whatever they need to do to be like, let's not. Let's talk about this.
Let's not kill me right now. How about that? I think that is a lot of fun to play around with.
No, it absolutely is. Yeah, I think like whenever you give a player an interesting situation to resolve a combat rather than just you kill it, that becomes a lot more interesting because then it's like, okay, I'll let you go, but what are you going to do for me?
Right.
Or maybe your paladin says, no, he asks for mercy. We beat him. Like, let him go.
Right.
And that becomes an interesting moment just because your goblin said, let's not, please. And
and he just starts talking to the cleric. Booyah, booyah, booyah.
Yeah, that's right.
And not to mention, if you just kill every minion that you come across, are they really there? In the sense of, are they affecting your story? I am of the opinion that a combat should always affect something, whether it's the wider world or the characters that you deal in.
Yeah.
Mainly because, fun fact, I have been in physical conflict before for sport. And I got to tell you, whether it was being hit or hitting, it always leaves an impact on you. Heyo. But it leaves an emotional resonance. You can't just go through a fight, win, and just walk away. It's never like that. Even if you dominate something.
Right.
I find it to be very strange when players are like, I killed it like it's a Goomba.
Right.
And I'm like, you killed it, but that might affect, the environment, some person in this thing's family. We never think about the goblin families.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
But
yeah,
for me anyway, that's a philosophy that I work with, whether the fight is there to progress the story or to just affect the wider world or even the gods themselves. It doesn't really matter. I, for one, just don't want someone to walk away from a fight going like, that was fun, but it was kind of pointless.
Right.
To the wider narrative. And that's me. Mm-hmm. I can totally understand. Like, I knew one DM who would just throw skeletons at us for sport. Like, it got to the point where it was ridiculous. We went downstairs in a tavern once, and there were just skeletons there, and that attacked us. And we went upstairs to the barkeeper, and we're like, what the fuck is this? And my DM hadn't thought ahead enough as to why these skeletons would be down there. He just started sprinkling the world with it to the point where we kind of made a joke that in this version of the D&D world, that they're kind of a nuisance. They're kind of just everywhere.
Yeah, that is actually really interesting. And I mean, it makes the fact that in most campaigns, goblins being kind of everywhere, that much more like you don't ask a question about it, right? Because I mean, in a lot of sense, when you see a goblin in a fantasy setting, not just Dungeons and Dragons, but in any setting, they're always kind of viewed like rats, right?
Yeah,
like
a little
that they're
bit.
just kind of vermin and that they're kind of everywhere and that, all right, well, if you bring me back goblin ears, I'll pay you a gold apiece.
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially with the introduction with like monstrous races and being able to play them and that sort of thing. It's like, what is a goblin doing in your society
that
has led him away from being like the typical goblin, because it's like the goblin knows that when he's dying, he's becoming this like he's going to a heaven that's not so heavenly.
No,
so like,
it's not. It's awful.
Yeah, did he wisen up and be like, man, I should really do something with my life?
Yeah.
Or is it just like, you know, like what is he doing?
Or is he a little bit more cunning and he's trying to get more gold if he's more of an evil character? And
yeah,
something I would ask the DM, if you have a goblin PC, how does that goblin walk into a town if the wider kind of zeitgeist is that they are vermin? You know, like you could really play with some classic fantasy racism if you are a party and you walk into a tavern. I mean, if you're a dragonborn, you shouldn't be getting served, frankly, just because you're a giant dragon person and like a human farm. But let's say you walk in. You know, maybe you could brush under the rug that they've never seen that kind of monster race before, so they're just more in shock and fear and just don't want to upset you. But everybody knows what a fucking goblin is.
Right.
So if you walk into a bar and one of your PCs is a goblin, what if the barkeep just takes out a greatsword and he's like, get that nasty thing out of here, you know?
Yeah.
I think that is a lot of fun. And also that question of, well, now I kind of want to play a goblin who is some form of cleric that walked away from that religion because it sucked or converted somehow.
Again, I haven't watched all of it yet, but, you know, watching through Critical Role, Sam Riegel plays Not, who is a little goblin girl who's disguised herself as a halfling using like a terracotta faceplate. And, you know, there's just always these little hints where she realized that the kind of life that she was living was just not worth it and that she did not want to live that way and then moved on. But it is kind of interesting when you think about the character role-playing side. When you get into goblins, it's like there is a very strong goblin culture that goblins stick together, right? And that, you know, if a goblin stabs you in the back, that's just kind of how it is, right? There's kind of a general consensus that if your mob boss kills your buddy, it was for a good reason. Right.
It's an awful, awful way of life.
Yeah. And like to walk away from that, what does that look like from a player perspective, a player story perspective?
And then, like I said before, once you go into the wider society, how do you get accepted?
Right.
Not only are goblins awful, but they're viewed in such an awful light for good reason. Yeah. But you get it, you know.
Plot twist, or I mean, spoiler alert, you may not get accepted back into society. You may just be told, nope, get out.
Yeah. And that can be a lot of fun for players. And I think that might be more fun than maybe a hobgoblin, because a hobgoblin is essentially like a militarized just person who's short. Like it's not, they don't have a lot of special shenanigans to it. And that version of heaven, they view as honorable. They're joining a legion, you know, and it's funny to think of, you know, goblins, they get bullied by their goblinoid cousins like bugbears, and they're always, you know, bowing down to the stronger enemy. So I think a beholder or even like a dragon could use them as servants, but they're not great servants in the sense that they will backstab their master.
Right.
So there's a lot of fun ways to play them. But at the end of the day, if you're a PC, why'd you leave? Or are you going out for a master to come back to? You could still play the classic goblin in a way. All of that.
Yep.
A ton of fun.
Absolutely.
Now, I have one final thing to ask you.
Oh, boy.
So I would be remiss if I did not mention my favorite goblin. My favorite form of goblin.
Oh, boy.
Do you know about the Nilbog?
Oh, man, you know what? That name sounds really familiar. Wait. Yes. Yes, I know a little bit about them.
Okay. A Nilbog, which is goblin spelled backwards. I know the dyslexics already figured it out. Way to go, guys. High fives all around. You guys are great. The Nilbog is in Volo's Guide to Monsters right now. They're kind of an old school D&D idea. I'm pretty sure. I want to say they were in 3.5 at least. And the premise behind them is they are a reversed goblin. So they are witty, they are funny, they are chaotic, and they are trying to basically wreak havoc upon the world, and in a kind of Joker-esque style. right? They're tricksters.
Yeah.
And how they are a trickster is that lovely mighty one, Malglubjet, who I mentioned earlier, when he slew the pantheon of goblin deities, there is one goblin god who lived in a strange way. He is a trickster god that goblins know the name of, but they do not speak his name because they don't want Malglubjet to find out his name so he can find him, right? So it's this nameless trickster god who, when he was slain from this other god originally, broke into fragments of himself, shards, and his spirit flew across the cosmos. And when you have a goblin who is beaten down by society, or is in true chaos and pandemonium, or is just getting attacked or beaten up by a party, or a fucking better, whatever it is, they can become a Nilbog from this trickster spirit entering their body. Yeah.
That sounds
It sounds infuriating to a party. So
yes.
And that's the premise. The entire premise behind these things is to reverse the goblin trope. So what's the goblin trope? You kill a goblin. You come across a goblin and you kill it. A Nilbog is there to be infuriating because it's hard to kill him.
Right.
Because of, I believe he has two abilities. I don't quote me exactly for, traditionally speaking, the Nilbog is when you attack it, I believe it can use a reaction to make your attack damage 0. And it heals itself 1d6.
Oh, man.
So if you're a low-level party and you stab it, you can use a reaction and heal itself. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Which is infuriating to an early party. When you step on a Goomba,
yes,
it shouldn't get stronger.
Right.
And 2, I believe it has certain magical abilities like Vicious Mockery like a bard, Confusion once a day. But I also believe there's one other thing where you have to make some kind of wisdom saving throw to where if you fail, I want to say, get dominated and have to listen to the Nilbog. And mind you, this thing is pure chaos incarnate. So it's running about doing strange tricks on everybody. And it could very easily infuriate a party that just want that little shit dead. It's a goblin. You're supposed to die.
Okay, so Nilbogism. Any creature that attempts to damage the Nilbog must first succeed on a DC 12 charisma saving throw or be charmed until the end of the creature's next turn. A creature charmed in this way must use its action praising the Nilbog. All hail the Nilbog.
Yes, it is a reverse goblin. And I love it to the greater, wider lore, and I love it using against parties. Because, again, if you're killing goblins and you're stabbing them and scalping them and ripping your way through this goblin horde, and then one just gives you a fucking cheeky smile, it's over, dude. Oh, man. It just...
Do you imagine getting affected by Nilbogism and another party member killing it on like the exact next turn and you just being like, goodbye, Nilbog. Farewell.
Farewell, Nilbog. I mean, it's a killable monster, but for the lower parties, it's your first kind of walk in dealing with essentially a trickster god. It's the lowest level god you're ever going to have to deal with, this nameless trickster god. And what's even more fun about that is other goblins are fearful of the Nilbog.
Right.
They're fearful of the Nilbog. So here's how it goes. The Nilbog, you get Nilbogged. So essentially you are a god to the goblins.
Get Nilbogged, scrub.
You are a god now. You are a trickster god. So let's say you're a goblin boss and you're just beating the shit out of this one goblin and its eyes light up and maybe it suddenly is wearing pink and it can just tease you and mock you and it's as strong as you and it knows a form of booyag. It knows magic. So suddenly, this thing is now essentially in charge in a way, or at least respected to do its crazy whims.
Right.
And it's even said that the most serious of hobgoblins, if a Nilbog shows up, they will listen and play along and laugh at its jokes, whether they're funny or not. Like, it's bugbears terrified.
It feels like it feels like the 5e version of No You.
Yeah, a little bit. It's the reverse. It's the reverse Uno card. And
right.
It's a literal reverse goblin where while other goblins are getting killed and slain and are having a shitty existence, this thing's laughing and isn't gonna die right away and is just a pain in the ass. And all you want it to do is die. I had one DM who threw a Nilbog at us, and he changed the stats a little bit so that we couldn't hurt it, essentially, with anything we used. Until we tried to use healing spells on it, and we killed it with healing spells. And it did that reversal trickery thing.
Oh, my word.
It's so much fun, man. It's a little plot twist in what seems to be a regular encounter.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just dealing with goblins, you're not thinking Nilbog. And when you see one, you go, oh, whatever. I'm a big, strong barbarian. Let's stab it. And it's just looking at you.
Yeah.
And then you're singing its praises. And then it's casting vicious mockery and confusion on people. Like, that's fun.
It is fun. And, you know, this gets into the side of Dungeons and Dragons, which is like, hey, like 5e especially isn't all like super serious, crazy stuff. It's like, there's parts of it that are like more cheeky and fun and weird. And that's fun. That's fun to get into every once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, maybe your party had a really hard encounter last session where a player died. You know, it's fun to bring in that and just be, you know, oh, hey, get gently screwed by this monster that I threw in front of you.
Also, if you want to, let's say you have a power gamer just tearing through a campaign, do you want to knock them down a peg?
That's fair.
Have a Nilbog just pop out and go, hey, buddy. What's going on?
Hit me.
And you're like, oh no. And also, it's a breath of fresh air in Volo's Guide, frankly. When you look through that book, I mean, it's devils, demons, mind flayers, Alhoon, you know, all this very mean and nasty types. And then to hit like that, you know, flail snail, it brightens your day.
Oh.
And frankly, I think the Nilbog might be even a tad more fun than I like trickster spirits. I like fey tricksters, but every once in a while I'll use a Nilbog kind of in place of that.
Yeah.
Just to still get that vibe. I, for one, just enjoy the Nilbog. I love the idea of other goblins having to respect it and it being the only way a goblin can essentially get respect from these guys.
I mean, it's extremely humorous. And I mean, goblins, I mean, you can play some serious goblins, but at the end of the day, there's going to be some silly goblins. And I think this capitalizes on that.
It absolutely does. And I, for one, suggest to all you DMs out there, use this. I don't always give a recommendation, but here's a recommendation. Use a Nilbog. Just toss it in there, see what happens. Let your unnamed trickster god flow through the campaign and see what trickery and deceit you can use. I know, I believe it was last episode or 2 episodes ago, we talked about the trickery domain clerics.
Yeah.
I am in love with the idea of a goblin worshiping this god of trickery in his trickery domain, and his whole premise is trying to get Nilbogism. That's all he wants. And he's just praying and he's looking for it. And it's never going to come.
Until that one critical moment where he's about to die and he turns into a Nilbog.
And everyone's like, oh no. I think that is a genius player character. And as I was reading about it, I was just, you know, laughing my balls off at the possibility from that. I've run into it a few times. It's just fun. It's just fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important when you're talking about the grander scheme of D&D. We have a lot of, how should I say, I guess prejudices about goblins. They're killable. They're this, they're that.
Sure.
Always look through the lore for fun little tidbits like that. I think especially when we're talking about minions. It's kind of inspired me to see if I can spice up my bullywug life and see if I can do anything a little bit more elaborate with them. Personally, I think that is something that everybody should do, is read and really think about what you can or can't do with your classic goblins. So finally, I want to ask you one final little question. Oh, Doc.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. So you have all these different kinds of things you can do with goblins.
Sure.
You have all this different fun shit you can make for an encounter. Do you subscribe to the song Down, Down to Goblin Town, Ho, Ho, My Lad? Is that one of your favorite songs? Because if it isn't, we're about to play it, and it's about to blare your eardrums out.
Oh my, I can't say that it's my favorite song.
Guess what, buddy?
Oh no, where'd these plants come from? Oh God.
Welcome to Goblin Town. Bring out the Nilbog.
Oh God.
All right, everybody.
If you're listening to this now, send help.
Have a great day. Watch out for goblins, and I hope that you were able to have some fun listening about goblins with us. I'm about to go torture this human fighter. I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Oh no. Oh no.
Ho, ho, my lad.
You've just been listening to DumpStat, a podcast presented by Horizon Kingdoms. Horizon Kingdoms is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition server that's free to play. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and join up on Discord to join in on a new adventure. For more DumpStat, be sure to find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe.